Oh, we actually engaged. Yes. They're married. Yes, they are. I remember when they got married. We all know this. So they are. I know, but I put your own. Yeah. Yes.
You want to
Yeah. Just a little bit, that's too much.
We have different light settings that you can fill with by the door. They're not like fully visible. Yeah. You kind of just gotta play with them until you find the right one.
Okay. Not that one, okay. Yeah, that looks good. That looks good. Because we can see the information on the screen. Yeah. And then I'm going to send you the link for the live.
There's a phone back here on the desk. Is someone missing their phone? Okay. Oh, sorry. I said I didn't have it's totally fine. So how many rotations are there? Because,
the names, that's just, yeah,
I just sent you the link.
I just got it.
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, I mean, I really do feel like there's a need to do something. Or, you know, it's like everybody is some of them already know.
Yeah.
I just feel like the coalition needs to street, you know, and to actually do, I mean, we're doing short but I
I mean,
mean,
at some point, some strategy down the line.
yeah, well, some strategy that is artistic response to this, you know, whether it's a resistance or government crimes or whatever, some kind of action, the artist and I'm not even trying to be equality to start here or maybe it's outside and just
Well, I think it's
it is, right, after this community, the way we framed the to the finance is that there's reporting to the public, so they're going to maybe all the organizations.
Well, yeah, I wasn't planning on trying to bring this up, but I have no idea whether. You know, it's always
So because Martian
Hey.
Yeah, good.
No, this is the music. Yeah.
This is actually for my own.
Right. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Let's do it. Let's check. Now it feels like ballroom, right? Yeah.
cameo.
Yeah, just have to get the swipe key in there.
I think the door's open.
Yeah,
The door's open.
they need this. You need. Yeah, we can.
They've actually thought this through and have all the place. They want to be floating, city, and I said, I really, wait till after Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to take this.
Yeah. But I think that for our is you know, right. I wouldn't
Yeah. I think it's getting about better, especially like the self-footage. Like that's more stuff. So my clips would be like, I don't think this big thing everywhere. And that's like the part the live is already rolling. Yes.
Hello, everybody. We're gonna get started. My name is Oren. I'm on the steering committee of Circa Queer Histories Festival. Thank you for joining us for Ballroom Sex Work, Realness, and Survival. Who is a sex worker? Circa Queer Histories Festival is hosted by One Institute, the oldest active LGBTQ+ organization in the country, in celebration of LGBTQ+ History Month. A first of its kind in the nation, the LA County-wide festival is taking place throughout October and is a platform to spotlight the immense contributions of queer and trans people throughout history. Circa would not be possible without the support of our sponsors: 3rd District Supervisor Lindsay Horvath, the City of West Hollywood, Uptown Gay and Lesbian Alliance, Paul Lerner and Stephen Rice, Amazon, 2nd District Supervisor Holly Mitchell, LA County Department of Arts and Culture, 5th District Supervisor Kathy Barger, LA City Council Member Tracy Park, and our official broadcast sponsor, ABC7. If you RSVP to this program, we will email you a brief evaluation. We would really appreciate it if you could fill it out. Also consider supporting our work by becoming a member at oneinstitute.org. Thank you, and thank you to our programming partners, Sydney and Daphne, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. How are y'all doing? Very good. Hey, that's good to hear. Hopefully we get a little more vitality today, some more life. I'm very excited to do this presentation for you. Again, thank you so much to the One Institute, Circa, Gary, Tony. This is such an amazing honor. So just to get us started on the talk today, I want to give a little roadmap. I'll give a little background about who I am, my positionality, the methods, my resources. You'll see I wear many hats. We'll talk a little bit about ballroom history, the category of realness, which you might have heard of, as well as sex work and the kind of ballroom ecosystem. We'll also talk about the AIDS crisis, community mobilization around that. And then I'm so excited to have our guest, Ethical Drugs, aka Daphne, who's with us. We'll have a very amazing talk, kind of about first-hand experience, and then we can do a Q&A and kind of talk back. And if we have extra time, I have a little short video that goes along with everything that we'll be talking about today. So just to start us off, who am I? Sydney Blue. My pronouns are he, him, his, and girl. Because I hang out with the girls, so don't worry, you can always girl me. For me, I've been in the ball scene for 13 years. My journey started out in Europe, believe it or not. I started voguing in Berlin, and then moved to Paris and London. I was out there doing my graduate work, and I kind of fell into the ball scene that way before moving to New York City. I lived in Philly for a bit, and then moved out here to LA. I've been in the ball scene in Europe, Latin America, and in the US, and I've been doing this research and work on ballroom history for 9 years. It started as my master's thesis back in 2016 when I was at the London School of Economics. I had a totally different life back then. I was studying urban planning, and I was just really curious about ballroom history. I was asked to sit on a panel to talk about Paris is Burning, a documentary about the community, and I got worried. I was like, oh, I don't know the right answer. So I had a scholar at my house at the time. I was in the house of Omni, which was my first house, and I talked to the father of the house, Kevin Omni. I thought the conversation would be 30 minutes. He spoke for 3 hours. He was very loquacious, one of the old girls. But I thought, who's documenting this history? So that's kind of what got me into doing oral histories of the community. And from there, I first tried to expand my work, get a PhD after I finished my master's thesis. And then I realized, okay, academia wasn't for me, and I wanted to speak to more people. So I looked at pivoting into journalism and then later TV and film. So I was a co-executive producer on a TV show you might have heard of called Legendary. It was a game show on HBO. And also before then, I actually have written about ballroom culture for a number of news publications, Vice, the New York Times. It's actually kind of the anniversary of this piece that I wrote about realness that went viral 6 years ago, where I talked about the ins and outs of the category and what it meant to me as a trans person. So I'm excited because I also, one last thing to plug, I also just launched a Substack with my work, so you can check out more of my research on Legends of Vogue, and I'll have a little bit of that later. But I've done all this work. I also have done a ton of archival research too at the New York Public Library with one of their grants, so I'm just sharing all of this incredibly rich history that we have, and I have over 50 oral history interviews. So as I said, my work started with oral histories. This was from my first batch of oral histories I did part of my master's. Two of these people have passed. Icon grandfather Hector Extravaganza, Deja, and icon Deja LaCurlo, both huge members of the community. Deja was just an incredible person, very well known for hands performance as well as femme queen performance, amongst many other things. Grandfather Hector was somebody who was an icon of the scene who really just cared for the community in so many ways and showed up in so many ways, especially with the latex ball. And then, of course, icon father Jose Extravaganza, who's still with us, and you might recognize him from Madonna's Vogue music video. It was such an incredible interview that I did with him about what it was like to be on tour with Madonna and really make that huge So just to bring in some ancestors to our conversation, I really want to bring in Catherine Dunham. She was a African-American woman ethnographer who did a lot of research on African diasporic culture, dance in the Caribbean and in the United States. She especially inspired Alvin Ailey, and you see a lot of her technique in his work. George Chauncey, who wrote the book Gay New York, which came out in 1990, and he just wanted to do research on what was gay life like before Stonewall. And so that's where a lot of my work, especially on the Harlem part of this research, comes from. Arthur Schomburg, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican man who was told as a child that Black people have no history. And he was like, what? And he amassed tons and tons of artifacts throughout his lifetime to prove that to not be true. And today, the Schomburg Center in Harlem is part of the New York Public Library. It's actually a place for access to a lot of resources. Zora Neale Hurston, ethnographer, also an incredible Black woman who not only did research on Black folklore culture, but then also about, she had a positionality of somebody who was in the culture and also a little bit outside of it. And she's super important for me because I see myself the same way. And then last but not least, Marcel Christian LaBeija. He is the reason we're here today. He is the first ballroom historian ever. In the 1980s, he used to have these things called idle sheets, IDLE, where he would just write his thoughts about ballroom. He had this office that was in the New York Poets Cafe, because he was a costumer there. And he also worked a government job where he had a lot of idle time. And so he would make these packets with just like history, gossip, whatever the latest tea was about ballroom, and also a lot of history. And so I wrote a piece about him for them that you can also check out. So as I said for today, we'll see how much time we have, but I have some really great audio that I really want to share with you guys. It'll be my presentation. We'll also bring in ethical drugs. We'll have a Q&A. And I just want to set the intention for today, which is, number one, I definitely want to educate you guys on ballroom culture, history, and sex work. And we want to speak as both expert insiders, and that's so grateful to have Daphne here, as well as firsthand and secondhand lived experiences. Two, it's my intention to destigmatize sex work. And three, I want to highlight the necessity of sex work for survival and also just as a way to humanize this labor because it's very important that we do. So first of all, what is sex work? All right, so sex work is the consensual provision of sexual services between adults, which takes many forms and varies between and within countries and communities. Sex work is work, that is first and foremost. It provides a livelihood for millions of people around the world. It can vary in degree and to which form it is kind of formalized. So, you can have, there's so many different ways of kind of considering that, and we'll talk about that today. And sex work also includes the exchange for sexual services, for money, goods, reward, either regularly or occasionally. So I just want to make that clear, it's not just money that may be exchanged, there could be other things. So just to give you ways of thinking about it, anything from Girl 6, if you ever saw that Spike Lee movie back in the day, where it's about the phone call girls, and I have some money from that. Also, people like Electra's character on Pose, who's a dominatrix, working with private clients. So somebody as like Holly Golightly. And of course, OnlyFans today, or Backpage, if you remember that on Craigslist back in the day. So first, just to kind of root us, what is ballroom history? Where did it all start? So first of all, it started with the balls. In the 19th century, a lot of fraternal societies, they used to host these masquerade balls. This is a photo that I have of the New York Historical Society that I pulled from the Vanderbilt costume ball. Basically, prominent families in New York City would host these events. If you've ever seen the show The Gilded Age, they feel like they're always hosting balls. Well, the thing is, when they did these masquerade balls, this is where you would get people who were cross-dressing. So people who were part of our community would kind of find a way to kind of pop out, right? Like, if it's a masquerade ball, you can't tell, who's a woman, who's a man. And so this tradition kind of grew throughout New York City, and you would have a number of other balls that would crop up. And in Harlem, the biggest ball of them all was the one that was held at the Hamilton Lodge by the Oddfellows Society. And this was a Black fraternal organization that was founded in the late 19th century. They ended up doing an annual masquerade ball that ended up becoming the biggest ball in New York City, literally drawing thousands of people by the 1920s. So this really picks up around the Harlem Renaissance, and really it starts to be known as the quote faggot balls, because there people would want to see the queens and the kings, who's a man, who's a woman. And it became so big that at the end of the night, they used to have this thing called the Grand March, where the queens would parade down one by one and be judged on who was the most queenly, who looked the most like a woman. And you would also have it for the drag kings, who was the most kingly. And so what's so interesting is this coincides in the 1930s as this grows with what was known as the pansy craze. So really, this is the first time we're seeing overtly LGBTQ+ people. So our people. Yeah. Okay. We can also tell them to fight that.
We're recording.
Okay. So yeah, and the pansy craze is a big deal because it's actually when we first had the idea of heterosexuality emerging, because there's the idea of homosexuality that is finally really visible in public life. So this becomes a really big thing. People would love to go to what were considered kind of like almost gay affairs. And as I mentioned, with the Hamilton Lodge, they hosted their event at the Rockland Palace. And by the 1940s, there's a person who kind of emerges as the drag queen with the biggest ball, and this is the Phil Black, who was a drag queen from Pennsylvania. And Phil Black had moved to New York in the 1920s. He really became a household name of sorts. This is actually an image you see of Phil Black in Jet magazine, because he was the person who teamed up with the Hamilton Lodge to host this huge funmakers ball. In so many ways, Phil Black is like a precursor to RuPaul, I would say, because he became so well known for hosting this super fun event that so many different queens would come to. And what's really cool is actually the Johnson Publishing Company with the Getty, they recently released these images from the 1940s and the 1950s of some of the queens that you would see there with their decadent outfits. And I think one thing that's really important to emphasize here is, back in the day, you couldn't just buy these things. These are all very bespoke items, right? Even when you look at the materials that were used, it's just absolutely incredible. But what's so big about this is the fact that in these events, they drew people from all different backgrounds. White queens would go uptown, black queens as well. You would have a mixing pot of so many people, rich and poor, who you would never see necessarily together in the same room. Which is kind of the power of ballroom, in my opinion, is that it brings people of so many different backgrounds together under one roof to celebrate. Now, another thing I really want to emphasize at this time in the 1940s and then in the 1950s is the emergence of this idea of being a female or male impersonator. Because back then, they didn't necessarily use the term drag queen. It was really this idea that to be a man or to be a woman was a type of performance and an art. It was truly an art form. So in the 1920s, one of the most famous male impersonators you had was Gladys Bentley, who was a household name. Another person who emerges in the mid-20th century is Stormy DeLarvery, who's part of the Stonewall generation, was a male impersonator who traveled with the Jewel Box Review, which was actually a traveling cabaret company. And in New York City, you had these kind of spaces where female or male impersonation was allowed to happen. So another one of those places was Club 82, the 82 Club. And basically, it was a spot on the Lower East Side where the performers on stage were all women and the waiters were all men. And by that, I mean butches or drag kings, which is what we consider trans men. And on stage performers were all, either drag queens by today's standards, trans women, so on and so forth. In New York City at this time, you were not allowed to cross-dress going to work. So everyone had to bring their effects with them and change backstage. And the one big rule was you also were not allowed to be on hormones. So that was also a no-go, because that starts to appear in the 1960s. A really great movie that documents all this is P.S. Burn This Letter, Please. I had ever been, yes.
And not just the lab, people were actually arrested.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But what's interesting is when the balls were happening, actually the cops were actually patrolling the balls to protect people. It was the one night out of the year where basically you were allowed to cross-dress because you had to get to the function. So that's also kind of what's interesting is there are sometimes these liminal spaces that we have, what I call, so like, for example, Mardi Gras, right? That's like the one day out of the year where you're allowed to just go crazy and nobody judges you. Another one that's coming up for us is Halloween. There's always this funny joke that every Halloween amongst my trans girlfriends, a trans girl was born or a trans boy was born, because you're allowed to dress differently than what society says is acceptable. So in a way, the balls also kind of fit under that category too. Another podcast that kind of documents this scene is called Mob Queens, and I highly recommend you checking it out. It's by my friend Michael Seligman, who was a producer, or who is a producer on Drag Race. And again, it kind of documents the scene, particularly because Club 82, what's fascinating about it, not only would like celebrities go, there's literally pictures of like Jackie O and JFK there, as well as like Urban Cat and other folks. It was like a place that people would go in New York City. The place was actually owned by Vito Genovese, New York City's biggest mob boss, his wife. And so you kind of hear the story of like, there's always kind of like a hand-in-hand relationship oftentimes with queer history and mob. I think about Stonewall. But just to kind of bring us into this idea of female impersonators here, we actually have a picture of one of the founding mothers of Voguing, Amos Pendarvis. This is something from the archive. There are these magazines that came out in the 60s that would kind of give like play-by-play about like how to be a woman or how to dress like a woman. And you can also see sometimes the drag kings or trans men in them too. And I just wanted to share this with you. This was actually from 1970, just to give you a sense of like, sort of what it took to kind of adorn yourself in those kind of ways. And in so many ways, this is kind of like the, I would call periodical mothering that was happening, right? Because it was very hard to get your hands on these items. And of course, if you were a trans woman or drag queen, again, somebody who was gender non-conforming by today's standards, these would be really coveted items where you could look for ways to dress yourself and figure out how to do your hair or makeup, so on and so forth. And also in the back of those in the back of these magazines, were also ads for whether it was like other types of sort of sex work material, or even ads for sex work itself, because that also often comes hand in hand with our community. So this kind of brings us to this conversation I want to have about realness. I was going to show you a clip, but I have so many things to get through. So what I'll say first is here we have an image of Crystal LaBeija. Does anyone know who Crystal LaBeija is? Yeah, you. Who's Crystal?
She was featured in Paris is Burning. She was very famously clipped for reading the White Queens down.
I love this. Okay, so yes, half of this is true. So she actually wasn't in Paris is Burning. She was actually in The Queen, I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
So there's a film called The Queen that came out in 1968. It documents a ball in 1967 where several, again, what we would call female impersonators back then, were competing in a pageant contest. It was hosted by this drag queen here, Flawless Sabrina, who is originally from Philadelphia. Now, Flawless hosted her balls in a very different way to New York City, because all the functions I showed you before, they were more like a dinner reception, music, and at the end of the night, maybe a couple of categories for the kings and queens. Now, with Flawless, she flipped it, and she wanted to make a version of the Miss America pageant contest, which had been televised for the first time in 1954. So she had a traveling show of doing balls like this, where she'd have different contestants. They would have sashes that were kind of like related to where they were from. There wasn't like a formal sort of process the way Miss America is today. But basically, they would all compete. And then you see this in the documentary, because it goes behind the scenes. And there's queens of various shades, colors, so on and so forth. And Crystal, by this point, she was a big name in New York City. Now, Crystal, the name LaBeija, has many origin stories. On the one hand, there's one story that she was so exotic looking, the girls used to call her La Asia, and that kind of morphed into LaBeija. There's another version that there's a group of Latin queens who rolled together who were called the Delightful Ladies, and they loved Crystal, and they called her La Bella, which in Spanish means the beautiful, and that kind of morphed into LaBeija. Now, either way, Crystal was a very big name who would win at a lot of these balls in New York City. She was originally from Manhattan, allegedly came from a prominent family in New York. And she had a following of folks who kind of were part of her group. And so what ends up happening in the documentary is you see her get slighted. And that's to your point where she starts to read down, yes. And the thing is, what's very clear is the winner, Harlow, who's actually still alive today, she was from Philadelphia. And you see Flawless and her assistant helping this queen get a win, which is so crazy. And I don't know if it's just like the 60s where they're just not aware that they're being filmed or whatnot, but Harlow ends up winning, and then Crystal has a great moment in the basement with Nicole, who was also LaBeija at this point, where they just read down. And for a lot of people, they see this as the genesis point of ballroom, because one of the things that Crystal points out is, basically, this queen had no talent. Why was she chosen over me? And also, there's a question about race that's kind of like unclear, right? I would argue, though, Crystal's story is a little complicated because she was also light-skinned, and she was able to kind of pass at certain balls, by looking more ethnically ambiguous than darker skin. Because there also was a level of racial politics that would happen in the drag scene at this time, which I will say is kind of complicated, because from the images, it looks like everybody's kind of hanging out together, but at the same time, it's unclear because there's some stories of Black queens who were not able to get into every ball where they might have been dominated by white queens. But either way, this was a turning point for ballroom. Stonewall happens a year later, and by 1972, the House of LaBeija hosts its first ever ball. Now, one of the cool things is I actually got to know one of the contestants from this documentary, Marlo, who was a LaBeija in the 1960s, and she became my trans grandmother. She actually recently passed away about a month ago. And Marlo told me a lot about what it was like to be a LaBeija in the 60s, and I'm excited to share this with you right now. Is it playing? That's the one. Oh, here we go.
How are you? It's good to hear from you. So I just thought I'd just talk to you a little bit about the film. I figured I'd ask you a couple of questions or just, hear your thoughts. So first, Marlo, obviously you were another major figure in the film. I was curious if you can talk to me about that night. What was it like to walk that ball for Flawless?
Well, it was very unusual and a lot of fun.
And for you at this time, you were already in New York City because you said you had arrived in 1961?
Yes, I was there, just had arrived that year.
You had mentioned before that you were a LaBeija, correct?
LaBeija was the club, that means the House of Beauty. Crystal LaBeija was the president, and she started the club, and it was called the House of LaBeija.
And
So you had to really be good to be in there.
And tell me about what it was like to meet Crystal. Just how many years before the ball did you meet her?
Well, she was the president when I got there in New York from Chicago, and she was always the president of the club as long as I can remember.
I remember you said you met her through somebody who was in the Delightful Lady.
Yes, I did. The Life Lady, that was a group of girls who supported us greatly because they're always standing on the word of LaBeija. So that was the thing. That was New York thing, and it spread it all over America. LaBeija, everybody wanted to be beautiful. Crystal said, tell me and show me someone who don't want to be beautiful or look good. And she was right. Everybody's coming from near from far to see the girl from the house of Fantasia. They made each ball really great and successful with all their great ideas and how beautiful they all were. And not to mention only beautiful, they were feminine. And that was another thing about the house of Fantasia that was original. The girls were feminine. And they make a big difference in New York.
At that time, were any of the contestants, like, was it normal to be using hormones at that time as a
Yeah, they were just coming out, yeah. The female hormones were just coming out. And you just took a little pink pill and your breast would grow. But that was not allowed in the city because that was considered to be female impersonating. And if you were caught by the police, you would certainly have been arrested.
But at that time, you said that you passed very well, right?
Oh, I did. It was very important. I was passing and it didn't go a month. Yeah. Yeah, because the people picking on the girl, even at that time, because it was new. They called all kind of queers and freaks and names, faggot, fruits. Those were the names they were called, the city punk. And we were always ridiculed and beat too if they got the chance to beat you. So we kind of stuck around in our group.
I was curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the other contestants in the film. Like, can you say a little bit about Nicole?
Yeah, she's a dear friend of mine, actress, though. And she was a sweet person. Just a little hard-headed. And every time she was hard-headed, she would get arrested. So we would tell her, don't do that. And don't do this. And she would do it and get caught and then take her to jail. She had to be careful being around the girl because the police was always after her.
And do you know why they gave her the Fire Island badge?
Because she lived near there.
Oh, okay.
After she left New York, of course, she came to Hamburg, Germany, and worked there a few years before she married, met her wife, got married, and then they moved back to New York on Long Island, and that's where they were until Nicole had the accident. I kind of forgot the year exactly, but she did get was murdered. She was murdered and was ran down by a guy with a pickup truck. He told her, don't come on the block anymore. And she went out there on the block just as a woman. And he ran her down with the truck. And she died from her injuries.
I mean, you walked forward with Nicole in Chicago, in your mentioned in the 1960s, right?
Oh, yes, I knew Nicole always came where she thought I would be, because she knew something would be going on.
So, with this conversation, part of why I had it here is really to emphasize the importance of the house system in ballroom, which is that houses were there to protect folks, as Marlo talks about it. It was kind of like a club, and that they really provided support. They were sources of pride and protection. And as you heard in Marlo's the dialogue that she had, she talked about how they were feminine, that it was really important that they passed, right? Because passing as a woman was how you could be safe. And it's interesting because in ballroom we have this category of realness, which is both about fantasy, it's about who you want to be, your desire, your real authentic self, and on some level it's also about survival, because it's about, again, the cops not stopping you, you not being harassed, And we have this category of balls, which, like I said, dates back to the 19th century. Really, having that at a function is a kind of skill, right? That you can, be unclockable in that kind of way. And in many ways, realness actually is the foundation of ballroom, because the culture, as I said, was started with the House of LaBeija, right? And it started with this idea of being able to pass, and from there, you had more gender identities who started to join the functions, particularly the butch queens or gay and bisexual men in the 70s who were like, we want to walk a category. So they created this idea of the trilogy, butch, mod, face. You had to be butch, you had to look like a model, and you had to have a beautiful face. They got their own realness category. And then from there, it multiplies where you get more categories. Even voguing on some level kind of has its roots in realness because it's about presentation. You're telling a story with your body, which is what you're doing when you walk the realness category. I was going to show a clip of Paris Burry, but I think we all kind of get the gist of what that's about. For me, I've walked realness. This was actually taken from a ball in Paris in 2015. I walked butch realness because I was a butch lesbian back then. And in so many ways, it was also for me the portal to my transition, really showing the possibility, kind of like what I was talking about with Halloween or Mardi Gras, that brief moment where you get to be yourself for one night. Now, the pioneering mothers of ballroom, Dorian Corey, Papa LaBeija, Paris Dupree, Crystal, and Avis Pendarvis, they all came from that world of female impersonation that I mentioned, and they're extremely crucial to the creation of ballroom. Because as I said, they provided, as mothers, food, sometimes shelter, financial help to the children, mentorship, protection from dangers associated with street life, including sex work. Also, the balls are so notorious for starting super late at night. Now, there's two reasons I've heard about this. One, in New York City, when nightlife is booming, you got places like The Loft, Paradise Garage, Studio 54, what have you. People want the after party. How do you get as many people as possible? Well, put the ball at 5 a.m. when the clubs close. Now, there's also the reality that a lot of the people who would want the balls were working girls. So it's also convenient to have the balls really late at night, or even categories late at night, so that they can come and also compete. Now, the thing is, with ballroom, there's a kind of ecosystem that happens, right? And this is also gets into the economics of sex work. Because the reality is there was a lack of access to mainstream employment, housing, because of all the discrimination and police harassment. There are major systemic barriers for Black and Latinx, queer, and trans people. So this is why sex work ends up being one of the many economic tools that people of various backgrounds of ballroom might use. Again, it was not only an economic reality, but also for a lot, it was a form of survival because they were shut out of the formal economy. You can't just necessarily show up to work as your true self. Again, if you pass, you might be lucky enough, but not everybody does. So I just wanted to highlight some sites for sex work. This is kind of part of the really interesting part, I would say. In New York City, there's a lot of different areas where sex work, especially as it relates to the ballroom, would happen. The Christopher Street Pier is super famous. If you've ever been to New York, this is off the Village, on the other side of the highway. There's all these famous scenes from Paris's Burning with Venus Extravaganza, who's very well known, because unfortunately she was killed by one of her clients. And in the documentary, I'm Your Venus, they kind of reopened the case and looked into it. But the pier was a place where, yes, there was on the one hand, a place for people to live, to be themselves, to vote, to enjoy, life, and also just find other people like them. And it was also a place where clients would come and also engage sex workers for work. So that's something else that you see there. This is a clip actually from, I think we get the point of the pier, but there was also a lot of voguing happening there. I really like to speed this up just so we get all the fun parts. Another place where sex work happened was Sally's Hideaway. Sally's Hideaway was located at 264 West 43rd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue in Times Square. And it was actually run by two femme queens, Sally Maggio and Jessie Torres, the hostess manager. Now, Sally's Hideaway was a go-to place for go-go, boy contests, male stripping, drag shows, many of whom by trans entertainers. You would see folks like Dorian Corey, Jane County, even Angie Extravaganza perform there. And the customers were a mix of trans folks, either pre-transition, drag queens, cross-dressers, transvestites, chasers, male strippers, all kinds of hustlers. And there was actually a fire that happened there, so they opened Sally's 2, which was just around the corner in 1992. Now, what's super cool about this space is there are also a lot of balls that happen. A lot of the working girls would go there. And I actually did an interview with Monica Extravaganza. She's an icon in the community, and she's somebody who actually used to work there as a waitress. So I have some really fun clips where she talks about what it was like to be there.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Oh, I was having a blast.
Yeah.
I waitressed at both places.
Oh, okay, yes. So tell me.
At Sally's, the first one, I waitressed for a while. When it burned down, we moved next door, and I still waitressed there. Plus, I was a regular showgirl there.
Wow, so
Yeah,
okay.
and then I won. They have a pageant at Sally's
Uh-huh.
called Woman of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every couple of years,
Okay.
and so I won that.
What year do you remember?
I was the last one in the late '80s.
Oh, wow.
And but after I won that,
Uh-huh.
they made me assistant manager.
Oh, wow. So you were looking up.
And then Sally's finally closed down after.
Oh, no.
The police raided, a whole bunch of shit happened, and that was it. Closed it down.
Why did it close?
Because Giuliani came into and he didn't want to know, that type of place there anymore. And that place was around for 25, 30 years.
Wow.
But he didn't want that there.
Wow.
He didn't want that there.
Mm.
You know?
So then when you went to Sally's with the working shows on that night, what did you see?
Yeah, there were shows. The girls were doing shows up on stage and stuff like that. It was really nice. It's a small bar. The stage would come out of the wall, and the stairs would climb up and stuff like that.
What kind of show? So is it more like a cabaret space?
Cabaret stage.
Okay. So
More intimate, but more nice.
okay, so
Yeah.
then is it that like the different
A lot of men would go there to get some of the girls, stuff like that, because it was a lot of a pickup joint also, The girls would sit at the bar, the guys would come and get them drinks and chit chat with them and stuff like that, they would leave and stuff like that. Also, the show would go on, they would sit there, There was a pool table in the back where you could go play pool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, did you end up performing at Sally's?
They had a talent show, and that's when I entered.
How old were you?
I was still young, I was like 23.
Oh, wow.
So I entered it and I won.
What was the talent show? What did you do?
For Your Eyes Only by Sheena Easton. By James Bond. And at that time I had a little boyfriend that I was with for a while, that I grew up with. And he would come to see me. And at that time I was working for Robin Bird's sex lines. I was one of those sex phone operators.
Oh, wow.
Where they used to call,
Yeah.
"Hi, can I help you?" They used to call and it was $15.99 a minute, $12.99 a minute, or 13 for 3 minutes, something like that, 25 for 5 minutes. And I would keep them on the phone until, whatever happens on the other line. And men used to call all the time. They used to call back and it's like, "Can I speak to Sandra? Can I speak to Vanessa? Can I speak to Linda?" And they were all the same voice. Of course.
But of course.
Linda was the dominatrix. Vanessa was the demure one, Carmen was the hot, sexy redhead. So, I made a pretty cute, coin from Miss Robin Bird. We had to pay, we had a steady paycheck. We had a, steady salary. Yeah, and meanwhile, Sally's was a little quiet little place where the girls would go there to work or whatever, do shows or whatever.
So, I think that's enough. I'll give you Monica. But as you can tell, she, it was a great conversation. She's also just a wonderful person, and she also hosts a night in New York City at Times Square. She's an incredible story. Another person, and I'm so excited to share this with you, Anjali Milan. Super iconic. It's so great. She was known, and she called herself a lip queen, which I thought was so cool, which basically was like, she was known for face, femme queen face, realness, I think also body, but she was just also an incredible person. And she also used to work at this place called Show World. And this was actually featured, if you saw Pose season 1, if you remember Angel, the Morris character, it was like a peep show where it's like you put in the coins and the girls perform. that was actually a place that Anjane worked, and I'm excited to share with you her story, which is so cool.
I was working at the peep shows in Times Square.
Oh, was it like show up?
Show World, Show Center.
What was it like to work at Show World or Show Center? I talked to Brian.
It was good, it was nice, it was fun. It was a mix of ballroom girls mixed with, you know, regular everyday, you know, trannies, and we all just had freaking ball, and we laughed, and we played tricks, and so we got for a good kiki, so you could count me in, so good time. It was like the Starburst, the Starbucks of the U.S. today.
What do you
like other people said that they're happy environment, they got their own language, you know, they have our own language, we spoke Latin, we were used to tricks, like it just was just freaking good time.
Oh, okay, you gotta teach me some of the language. What was the language that you would use? And it's funny you do that because I used to work at Starbucks, so I totally know what you're talking about. What kind of language did you guys use with each other? I wanna hear.
We would talk Pig Latin, You ever heard of Pig Latin?
Of course, where you like take the
Okay,
letter.
so then we were breaking down and some Pig Latin, and I mean, you may catch 1 or 2 words, but you're not gonna catch the whole sentence.
Wow, so what, and also like, okay, was it that you would like kiki about the clients or something to each other, or like, what's the deal?
Or, you know, he got money, or he don't got no money, you know, he got a big dick, or he don't got a big dick, or one friend goes up, so we got everything.
Got you. Yeah, because I was gonna say, was it like, did you see Pose season 1? They had their own presentation of the way they showed Show World. Did it look like that, or did you think it was accurate?
It was accurate, but the few things didn't check off, like the way they all hung out and got ready at was not as nice as that, but everything else was right. Well, Show World, Show Center, and Show Palace were all owned by the same company, the same bunch of old white men. But Show Palace was only for the men.
Gotcha.
That was for men who wanted to see men.
For fun, yeah, for statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Then,
And then Show Center was for just the femme queens, the tranny girls. And then Show World is women, natural born women, and P-girls downstairs.
okay, so you guys both.
Yeah, we have both, which was so awesome when guys would just venture out and just would find us and then would just come to leather versus suede when the panties came off. Oh my gosh, it was just so hilarious and stuff. Those tricks in there, Disney World, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then they see us, and everyone is like, trying to get their most female, beautiful, perfect self. They come in the booth, honey, that curtain go up, and she is packing 17 inches long. Come on. That's her song. That's like them. No. And you heard the knocking in the booth of his boat, getting the boat, trying to open up that door so goddamn fast you do. You got another one.
You mean like that it was the first time and that they like freaked?
But they decided to give an extension for what was going on upstairs, so downstairs was very different.
Gotcha.
It's not like it was a neon sign that said, trip with a. There you go.
Okay. And there you go.
And there you go. Yeah, so that was just like another example. Also, I don't know, I just love the fact we're both true trans people, just kiki. That's so hard. Another place is 14th Street. Folks who've seen the documentary on HBO, The Stroll. This was another place for sex work, a lot more dangerous and less of a controlled environment in a way. But I was going to show a clip of this, but has anyone seen this documentary yet? Yeah, I highly recommend. Here, I'll just show like a draft of it, but then I'll keep it moving.
Do you remember when we used to walk down here and all the neighbors used to stare at us and we used to be, and we would just be running away. They would look at us like we were circus freaks. You could tell they enjoyed it.
The minute I got off on 14th Street, you could hear the clickety clack of the hills.
The light, the shadows.
We called 14th Street the straw, and that was our turf.
Some people choose sex work because they want to. Being trans women in the 80s, a lot of us did not have the choice.
People were not hiring people that looked like me.
Trans life in general, it was difficult. I wanted to make people understand the reality of our lives through storytelling.
The one issue today that obsesses New Yorkers: crime.
The trainers were out on the street 24/7. It was really a very bad situation.
I mean, they think I'm out here to murder people instead of have sex with them, but mine.
You know, so,
Everybody's a client.
I actually gave fellatio to a man who was a cop. And after I was done doing his deed, he arrested me.
Whether it was from the police, whether John, there was a lot of violence.
I almost got killed by a John who dragged me for half a block in his car.
We were on the front line with the gay and lesbian community, but you're not doing anything to help me from getting attacked. We knew we were freaks to them.
I can't even believe it. It's like the things we had to do.
The trans community has been in survival mode forever. It's important that we all get an opportunity to thrive. We fought.
Such a beautiful film, but I'll let you guys watch the rest of it at your own leisure. Because the last person I spoke to, I wanted to share with you, was I also spoke with Javon Martin, who is an icon and a Hall of Famer in the ballroom scene. He's a trans man and a dear friend of mine and a mentor in many ways. I wanted to know about trans men and also butches or butch lesbians by extension when it came to sex work. Because we're often talking about trans women who are very much on the front lines, also butch queens or gay, bisexual cis men who are also engaging in sex work, but I wanted to get some insight from Javon, and he gave me some really interesting stories.
What can you say about like trans men as it relates to sex work in foreign culture? Yeah, so just want to say that when trans guys start taking medication, right, testosterone, your sex drive gets higher, right? And that can contribute to sex work. It may be one of the reasons. And another one of the reasons we all know is because the trans community is displaced, right, and unhoused. And sometimes when our community links up with folks to have a place to stay, sometimes sex work is used to leverage a place to stay, right? Because sometimes they don't have the financial means to pay for a room or pay for their own apartment. So they end up having to be a roommate, and that's ways and means of paying for their space, sex work, right? Utilizing their body. So we want to, as far as New York, we want to bring in the Village, like Christmas Street. We want to bring in Washington Square Park, right? These are the places that trans men often frequent these spaces, and when you want to bring in the ballroom scene, trans men are part of the ballroom scene, and these sexual behaviors are happening at the balls, right? In the parking lot, in the cars, in the bathrooms. These things have happened, and we've seen them happen on social media, right? Some people have been live and shown this happen. There's several viral videos of one trans man, I want to say it was about a year ago, 2 years ago, in a parking lot, having sex. Just being, I'm going to say the word promiscuous, but if this is what they do, this is their behavior. Didn't see a condom, didn't see any type of protection, not only for himself, but the gentleman that was having sex with him. all right, but, you know, but
So one of the things I wanted to highlight with this was, I think from the conversation with Javon, which was fascinating, was instead of there being like specific places for trans men per se, it seemed like there was a level of even more informality to the informal economy. So by that, you know, when he's talking about the places where sex work happens, it's not necessarily that there's a designated place. It's kind of like trans men may be in different spaces and also be in a space of need where, again, they're bartering for, you know, whatever their needs are, one of which is housing. Just to kind of give some, to add to this conversation, one of the big things obviously that hits the ballroom scene and the LGBTQ+ community massively is of course the AIDS crisis in the 80s. It impacts ballroom like no other. There were so many oral histories that I had done with people where they talked about, you know, like one day your friend's here and then the next weekend, you know, you're burying them or you're going to their funeral, which I feel like Pose did a good job of showing what that reality was like. Now, the thing that's so fascinating is all those mothers who I showed you before, a lot of them ended up being part of the catalyst to figure out what to do. And so what Ballroom ends up doing is partnering with the Gay Men's Health Crisis, or GMHC, to do outreach. Because GMHC was very, very, very white. And black and brown LGBTQ+ people, particularly trans women, gay, bisexual, cis men, were dropping like flies. And they were like, how do we change this? So what they did was, with the mothers of the scene, especially Avis Pendarvis is a big name, Angie Extravaganza was one too, they figured out, hey, first they created this thing called the Latex Project in 1989. And the idea was to do outreach. They used to have tables at a ball, a bowl of condoms, a bunch of info. Nobody would take the info, everyone would take the condoms. And then finally, they were like, you know what? People were like, if you want to be taken seriously in this community, you need to throw a ball. And if you're going to throw a ball, you need to be a house. So in comes Arbor Santana, who is one of the founders of the House of Latex. And so the House of Latex ends up throwing the latex ball. And they threw the first latex ball in 1992, 1993. That ends up becoming the biggest ball in New York City over time because it was free. They would give out information. They would do a lot of outreach for the community there. This is super important because, of course, the most marginalized and the most vulnerable people were people who were especially doing sex work in the community, amongst others. And this really shows Ballroom's ability to have agency and resilience. So I'm going to show you like just a little snippet of the latex ball just to give you a sense. This is a PSA from '94 after the first year. But just to give you some closing thoughts, balls, they gave LGBTQ+ people a place to flourish, thrive, express ourselves. Realness was about celebration, aspiration, survival, especially for LGBTQ+ and sex workers. Ballroom has its own ecosystem with houses and parents who protect the most marginalized in our community, especially sex workers. And sex work is a part of Ballroom because of all the intersecting oppressions that make it to be part of the formal economy. And of course, the AIDS crisis was something that mobilized the community in a major, major way. So thank you so much for listening. I'm excited to have Daphne. And she specifically requested to talk with the mothers. So we're bringing them in our space. Cool. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm Daphne. I started my career off in the House of Chanel. So I've been at Chanel, then I became most known when I walked through House of Mizrahi with my mother, Gia, who is, I consider my trans mother, and sort of walking through some of had some time with Tishi, and then I also helped with developing and starting the Kiki House of Being Westwood, who I'm no longer a part of at the moment. Just we all the companies have their double S at the moment, when you're not part of the house.
You're considered a free agent.
Yes. But the current and active mother, Kiki Westwood, is doing such a great job with cultivating so much of it. And yeah, that's a little bit about me and Ballroom.
Yeah, and I mean, Daphne and I connected through a ballroom this year where you DJ'd under your DJ name Ethical Drugs. And you were telling me about the history of the house in Westwood. How was it founded?
So the way we kind of came across it was there was one night during the pandemic, so things were still kind of closed, and the girls and I were like, there was Yuki and another one of our like really good friends. We were all just kind of talking about stuff that was going on, and at the time it was a pandemic. We were, doing our traveling, working girl stuff, and we saw this tweet from one of the, I believe it was one of the fathers of the house that said, if you want to be in this house, you cannot be a sex worker. And for us, we were just talking about like the history of things, and it was just like, how can you take something that is almost so integral and so part of like a culture that like, we started the house, because we wanted to like honor the history of like the sex working, of not just like fully just sex work, but the aspect of what that was able to be provided from the mothers and the care that so many of the mothers put into their houses by being the working girl. Because at the time it was like, who was the parents of the house? It was usually, the most kind queen who could go out, find that client who would pay for the apartment, because God, $500 for a 3-bedroom apartment at the time was very great, so doable. But that's how they would, it was always the mothers and parents of the house that would be providing that. And a lot of times, being working girls, you see, working at the cabaret shows, working at the peep shows, working at all these different places that, I love that she called it kind of like Starbucks.
Starbucks,
And I was like, oh my God, at the time it was like you worked at these places, that's how you had your surgeries. And now it's Starbucks. You work there for a little bit, slow your soul, and you get your surgeries and you're done.
Yeah, because when you had told me about that, I was gagging because, as you said, and we literally just went through decades of how, ballroom is literally founded with the femme queens, but that says something, I guess, about the new influx of, especially with, I feel like in many ways it seems to point out the difference between trans and gay.
Yeah.
Or bisexual, like cis, really.
Because it's like, I still consider myself like a guest within this space, but like just from what I've observed and from what I've been seeing, it's like, from a lot of the film histories that we have in our people, it's like, being a working girl was like, almost like that's how they were able to like find community with each other, the mothers, they got together, they made these spaces, they used the resources that they got from it to just provide for other people. And when I spent my time working with like SWAP, that was like one of the biggest things. That's how I learned about harm reduction, and that's when I learned about like how to call 911 when there's stuff around substances and you don't want the cops to come, you want them to get the ambulance on. You had so much like information that was provided that gave such strong on the ground support on how to deal with everyday realities. And we wouldn't have, it's unfortunate that it's so tied, but like, a lot of the tragedies that did happen, it was either through the AIDS crisis, but like a lot of times too, that's something that like kind of, I feel like gets brushed over. We lost a lot of the people who were like our ancestors because of violence. Like I remember hearing from it, it was like, when you're working though, it's like, you don't want to have like videos like that being that's found in that's found in the other company, you know? And it's like, you know, and it's not just to like harp on like just one thing, but it's just like a reality of just like, this is just what it is. And it can be better. Like, you know, because the girls who were like living this reality that people would see as like something so hard and difficult, they made something so beautiful out of it. Like the strength like so many of these women to like, you know, find just like doing what they're doing, but not only that, provide for so many other people within the community. And so for us, that was like such a big ethos of the House of Beauty in Westwood was to celebrate the working girl, to celebrate the mothers, to celebrate like the fun people who, you know, put so much time and effort through the work that they did. Even though like, you know, it's hard to talk about, it's one of those realities that can get difficult to bring up, but like the more we talk about it, the more we're able to just normalize it and make it seem less taboo, make it seem like it's so hard because like, or like so out there. It's almost like it's like booking a therapist or like a hairdresser. There's certain things that some people know how to do that is a trade, and that's who you spend that time with. So just seeing it, it's literally just another trade.
Trade for the trade.
Trade for the trade.
That's what it is. No, but it's very important because sex work is work, as you noted, and I think what's fascinating about this, especially as we heard with Monica, right, when she talked about Giuliani shutting down Times Square. I mean, the Disneyfication of Times Square is so legendary, and I think what's like, or ironic with ballroom is you could even argue there's almost like a gentrification of ballroom if we're saying in 2020, you know, you guys were founded in 2021.
Like 2021 was when we started the discussion. We first came out, I believe it was like 2023.
Right, so 2021, you have basically trans women, femme queens, who are proof of the founding of ballroom being told, you can't do this thing that is like literally part of the culture, which, I don't know, I mean, with my research, one of the things that you see, especially in the 90s, all the mothers, major mothers, they pass away. AIDS really takes a lot of the femme queens away. I mean, definitely gay, bisexual men, the butch queens, but you really see this drop off. And I can even argue by the 90s, there's a shift, like, and you see this in the flyers, where it becomes almost a butch queen show, you know? And I think even for a lot of people, when they think of ballroom, they might not, they might think of trans women, they might not necessarily think of like trans men or butches, even though we've always been there since the beginning. But they definitely think of men. And I think, to me, it's even from that clip from the stroll that you see, right? It's like we were standing on the front lines for you. Where the heck are you? You know?
Yeah, and it comes down to like, you know, like especially nowadays, like, you know, we hear a lot now. It's like, you know, what is it going to take for people like, you know, our eyes to show up? It's like, you know, like as things get more and more difficult, when you have states that like, example in Texas, like if you use the wrong restroom, you're going to jail. You're getting arrested. It's the whole thing. And it's the fact that it's like signed into legislation, like, you know, I even know a friend who is like very affluent and very able to do what they do through the hard work that they've done because of being a working girl, but because they got clocked in a restroom, like just walking through the airport, like they got like fined for being impersonation. So you have those like impersonation laws. But you still also, there's so many states that do have the trans and gay kind of defense, where it's like someone can still claim like, oh, I went crazy because I, you know, this gay person, this trans person. So you still have all those like realities that like add to a lot of that. So.
I was gonna say, do you wanna open it up so maybe people can ask some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
I had my little question slide. Does anyone have any questions for either of us about any of this? Yes. Oh, and also please say your name.
Hi, I'm Father WerQer of the House of Urban Leger here in the West Coast. My question was the intersection between what's currently being said in ballroom about, you know, the predators and how, in the juxtaposition against, you know, how houses were created to protect, and also with the sex workers. How do you feel? Because I feel like this is my personal opinion. Sometimes the trauma and sometimes the drug usage is the answer, right? And the sex work is the answer. It's not also just about surviving and making a point, but it's also I'm still hurt and I'm still trying to heal from it, right? So with the current climate of ballroom, what do you think some feasible answers would be? Like, because now we're now seeing these witch trials being held in real time on Facebook with known predators. People are coming forward and telling their stories, but it's not necessarily in the most, how do I say, like the most
like community.
the community trying to build and trying to hold people accountable at the same time, understanding where they were and like, you know, being able to, so what would be some solutions to that?
So I come from a harm reduction background. With harm reduction, it's the practice of just meeting people with where they're at within their substance use, and just understanding that substance use is a coping mechanism to deal with the world as it is and the things that have affected it. You know, does it wipe away like anyone's like actions if they cause harm automatically? It doesn't, but for me personally, there's a way to hold someone accountable and to give that space where if someone needs that like accountability to just be able to say, hey, what you did like hurt me. And in that sense, like give that space for people to have healing from the harm that they have either been on the receiving end on, or but also like for the person who caused harm to be able to acknowledge like, you know, it's very healing for someone to be able to feel like, I'm so sorry I caused this harm to you. You know, because of XYZ, like, you know, this is what I'm apologizing for. You know, there's so much power and like that is given back after that. And I feel like, again, that's why we have these parents and these people who, you know, if there's a way for them to like see it as a way, I believe it's called just like something in terms of like accountability. Like there's like a process for that, and like
community accountability process.
Yeah, there's like community accountability processes that could happen. Whereas, like, unfortunately, we see that happen now where there are these, like, ostracizing, for lack of a better term, I'll just use the term, like, sort of like what you said, like, sort of like almost like a witch trial, which then pushes someone from the community over to the other side where they can use that whole, where they fall into that rhetoric, that right-wing rhetoric of, like, oh, this LGBT people, like, they did all this stuff, I was part of it, and then all this stuff. And you see how then things get so divided. Whereas you can have, there's so much more power in finding that community, like, accountability. I mean, again, that's on the basis of each person. Because for some people, they will never be able to be happy again. But at least attempt to, like, bring some sort of, like, mediation for healing for the person who has been harmed, / giving the person who caused harm the space to take accountability for the harm they caused. Again, it would probably be like the best thing to do, so that way we don't lose people to the other side. We don't lose people by like ostracizing, by like pushing people to the point where they now feel that like other ideologies make more sense. Because that's unfortunately how we lose people, and that's how things get divisive with communities, you know.
Yeah, I would say on that, I mean, it's interesting because one thing that I noticed, ballroom both reflects life and it like kind of the world outside of ballroom, and it also the outside world also kind of reflects into all. And so by that I mean, we are literally in a process right now of so much healing as a society. I mean, think about all of this discussion, Jeffrey Epstein, P. Diddy, I mean, the whole for bad behavior. I feel like that's kind of like in the air because clearly there were things that were happening in the past that nobody ever had accountability for. And so I think we're at a really interesting moment with Ballroom where, okay, the culture has built to such a crescent, right? This is almost like, you could argue like the third sort of iteration of mainstreaming as far as pop culture goes. And to me that says, yeah, we need community accountability. There needs to be some way to operate with this because yeah, in the 80s, right, you're like thrown into a house. Unfortunately, there were some stories I did hear from people where there was sexual exploitation of people in houses, right? And like, we know that ultimately it's a lot of intersecting oppressions. It's a lot of people who come from sexual violence and trauma. Yeah, you know, like there were a number of stories.
A lot of like the reason why we're like such a big marketing, like we're marketed by alcohol companies, like who's sponsored by a lot of like alcohol and liquor companies and like the people that like we're sort of seen as like a target group for addiction studies and things like that. It's like the reason why is because we're people that come, a lot of queer people come from like hard backgrounds, have backgrounds that a lot of, that have so many factors that a lot of people aren't always like prepared to deal with. And it's like at the end of the day, just see it like, you know, there's the people who are genuinely making mistakes, you know, and then there's people who, you know, when there's a pattern, you know. And so that's by getting the people who genuinely have made those like mistakes, the space to take accountability for it, but also hold, like, you know, there's the two truths of holding someone accountable for a repeated behavior versus like giving someone the space to be accountable for the mistakes that they caused. That's going to be, those are going to be like the two truths that are going to be held within that same space at the same time. And it's going to be uncomfortable having to see both sides of those coins, but everyone is going to be sitting somewhere in that spectrum. And it's just, that's just for me, my sectarian idealism is that like we can all somehow get together and at least if not find the commonality points, is just be able to say like, you know what, you and I, we've had our moment, we can't exist in the same spaces, but we're still going to be able to do the work that's needed to do that together.
Exactly, and to your point, I will say this, to me, the thing that I think is really tough right now for Ballroom is learning how to do that. Because the T is, we were never taught.
No one.
Anyone, right? We never learned nonviolent communication. A lot of us come from, So I'll say this, just to open it up to more questions. I think this is one of those things that's difficult because literally so many people are in recovery. I mean, the people who made it out in the 80s, like literally so many stories. And there's just, it's tough because on the one hand, there's all the creativity, the beauty, the glamour.
Behind the scenes,
Behind the scenes.
see.
I mean, even what you see, there are a number of people who I talked to, like literally one of my interviewees was like, Sid, we were all hot. In the 80s. Like everyone was on crack. Everyone was like doing, you know, like drugs. Yeah, well some of it's survival, some of it was the lifestyle. It was literally being in the life. So, you know, it's really tough. And I will say for myself, I've had to also sort of reckon with, okay, what does it mean to be in community with people who either may be in recovery or should be, where there's also a lot of mental health issues, you know, and you know, again, some people are getting support, some people are not. And that's also, I would say, just kind of the complexity of Ballroom. But I would even say, like I said, this is kind of happening in the world today, right? We're all dealing with like, you know, narcissists, a lot of people who are in recovery, mental health issues, you know, again, it's kind of like one of the realities of it. I wanted to open up just, did anybody else have any other questions? Yes.
I've been seeing a lot more conversations.
Did you say your name?
Oh, sorry. I'm Clover. I have been seeing a lot more conversations about, just in general, the potential of the internet not being available, because in a lot of ways it already isn't available to sex workers.
Especially
And
with now they're doing the age verification
Right.
via ID.
yeah. So I guess in a similar vein, what suggestions come to mind in building community in meet space in the ballroom culture and amongst like fellow sex workers to like really like keep us safe if we have to like go back to street-based work?
You know, hearing stories about like, there was a time where like, I forget what the diner is called, but there was like literally, my friend was telling me that like, once all the clubs got up, everyone met where, I think it's now called the Wetlands, but that's where like peanuts would happen. And like literally after it's everyone, you have the boys, the girls, and everyone in between working down. Yes. Yeah, you had everyone working the parking lot the diner afterwards. And like, you know, we need a little bit of that type of community again, where it's like everyone's working with each other, you know.
Yeah, a level of like kind of community care, it sounds like.
Yeah.
People looking out for each other. Sounds also like houses going back to sort of their roots, which was to literally protect members. I mean, that's also a discussion, can I say, in ballrooms. So many people have talked about literally the commercialization of ballroom or sort of this shift. You really do see a shift after Pose
And Legendary.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Big influx of queers and gays and people trying to find themselves.
Yeah.
As opposed to before 2019, it was like maybe 3 or 4 people coming in per year. You know, people that turned 18 and somebody's like, oh, you want to go to a ball? Let me take you to a ball. It was still kind of speakeasy.
And I feel like also too, there was a period of time when people were pumping into balls because they were like, I just want to find other people like me.
Yes.
I want to feel like within community. Like I want to see those other queers that I only am seeing on like film and video. Because like even me growing up in Orange County, like I didn't know about other like gay queer people like that existed outside of my high school. It was like in high school it was like, oh, there's just the one other kid. But then like growing up and then like meeting more people outside, it wasn't until I was like 19, 20 when I was like started go-go dancing that I met trans women for the first time. I met trans men for the first time. I met drag queens and like so much of this gender like so much of this variance within community that kind of be more of a language in my town. And I feel like, you know, maybe it, you know, when someone is so new and needing that like protection and understanding, a lot of the parents who have been through it, you know, you have some of them who are able to take people under their wing, who are able to act as those, maybe those people who can like, be those figures to touch.
Those sources of support. Yeah. I mean, I think to your question, it's really about the internet. I think social media is changing so many different ways. There are different channels that are emerging. I think that question of safety, it's going to be a conversation I think that ballroom has, or it has to have at some level. Because again, it is about our community members. And I think, you know, really to the point of the House of Vivian Westwood, it's this thing of like, oh wow, like the culture's been so taken over by people who can exist in the formal economy, right? Like that's a small, to me, again, I gagged when I heard the story because I was just like, oh my God. Like, that really is gentrification of the culture, literally by, you know, gay cis men. But to be fair, that is also LGBTQ+ like right now, right? Like so many trans people, myself included, some of the worst experiences we have are from gay and bisexual cis men who, you know, clearly there was a schism 20 years ago. You got your rights, the rest of us were still waiting on ours, right? And so to me, that also says there needs to be more movement in the community to wake up the witch queens. Like, hello, you need to be standing with us, you need to be supporting everybody and not just yourself.
It's like when we had the Manishing Society, where it was like, that was like a group of gay men who hung out with each other, but if you were a leather if you were a leather daddy, if you were a drag queen, if you were trans, if you were anything other than we felt like was like a red flag.
Or even a non-white person.
Or like white, non-white.
Non-white. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the schism is much older than that.
Oh, sorry.
And the gentrification of sex worker with the takeover of OnlyFans by celebrities, forcing out people who started OnlyFans. Let's go there.
Yeah.
You know, there's that. Coming out of Orange County in the 70s was challenging, let me tell you that. But yeah, all of that history, all of that schism, the gay and lesbian culture, so pinpoint marginalized that if you aren't in this, you aren't shit, you're, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, one thing I want to say with the research that I found, like all of these things kind of line up, right? Giuliani is 1992, right? Shutting down in Times Square. You see a similar thing happening in LA, clean up the cities, right? Let's push it
for Olympics with,
yeah.
the Olympics.
Yeah, oh
Yeah, that's our,
in
yeah.
LA, yeah, in '84. But still, you know, you could argue that like there was this shift of like clean up the cities, right? Push people out. Even when I did interviews with people like Deja, she talked about Sid, I was the last of the Mohicans. They were shutting everything down, right? The balls even kind of like leave New York City because you basically can't do a function anymore like you used to back in the day. And so what ends up happening is it's like that's happening and the internet's booming at the same time, right? So it's like things are shifting, and I would say we're also in a time right now where there's also a lot of things shifting, where like the economy is like, you know, in a dumpster fire right now, and so many of us are trying to figure out how to make things work. We're even having to figure out how to keep ourselves safe, right, in this like new space. So, you know, I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the next, you know, 5-10 years with not only sex work but ballroom as well. Jerry.
I want to keep going, but I want to be mindful of time. So, maybe one more question?
Yeah, we can wrap up.
Hi, Margin. I really enjoyed this program. I wanted to ask you about your work with the archive in ballroom, and like, what do you feel that archives get wrong or don't accurately portray about ballroom?
Ooh, okay. What do archives get right or wrong? Okay, so I had gotten the Martin Duberman Award. That was through the New York Public Libraries for $25,000 to do research on LGBTQ+ history. A lot of there's a ton of archives at the Schwartzman, which is like the big, pretty, fancy library. I was not always treated well. When you pull stuff, it was so interesting because I remember being policed by the librarian way more than everybody else, and I just was thinking about how, like, even those female impersonator magazines, right? Like, it was interesting to read them because it's one thing, they actually are online. You can access them on the Transgender Digital Archive. There's a place where you can click through. They're gorgeous. It's a very different experience when you actually physically holding the thing because you were actually in the mindset of a femme queen in the 60s, right? Where you're like, wow, it's real. Now, what I'll say, what I don't like about archives is that the room is like, you know, this aesthetic, really dry, bougie-ass place with a bitchy librarian who's like giving me the third degree while I'm trying to access my culture and my people. Like, that's the thing about archives that I don't like, is that they are so classist in a certain way. Like, you know, I will say New York City, anybody can go there, pull items, what have you, but just like, you know, it was kind of annoying to me of like, I'm trying to enjoy this thing and I can't, right? Or I want to enjoy it in a fun way and I can't. So there's things like that. Also like limits to what you can bring, like you can't even like see the videos. Like they have balls on tape at the Schwartzman that you can't access anywhere else, like GMHC functions that they did. Again, it's like, I have to watch this on my laptop in this like super freezing air conditioned bougie ass space. So that's the thing about archives, I would say is kind of annoying. As far as like, you asked another question, like what did they get wrong? I mean, a place that is really great that I found, again, the Schomburg Center, they have an amazing collection. They have tons and tons of flyers. I even got to hold Stormy Jalarbree's leather jacket. Like it's actually, and there's like, yeah, she's got all her stuff there. Tiny figure. So, you know, that was a cool space. Again, it's just, I think for me, archives, number one, I think what people need to know is that you all can be archivists first and foremost. You got a phone, right? You can record the elders in your community. There's so many people in our community whose stories need to be told. Literally just sit down with people. You know, it was that, like I said, that Skype call with Kevin Ami that went on for 3 hours where it's like, somebody needs to record this, you know, because these people are not going to be here forever. Literally, Deja and Hector passed, and, you know, I'm so grateful that I was there able to gather their stories. So one, I think it's important for people to know that you can do this history. You don't have to be a bougie-ass person with a bunch of degrees and all this bullshit. And no, really, like, because again, it's like, I feel like people think that this is like some faraway thing or that somebody else is doing it. No, you know, we really need to, as a community, we live in such an ephemeral space. They're constantly trying to erase us. Like, we literally have the digital technology, the tools to like reclaim our history and reclaim ourselves. And what's so important about it, like I said, with this expert, it is about reclaiming our humanity. You know, Giuliani said, we don't want these people here. And these people decided to stay and to make beautiful art, to say, we don't give a fuck. We're going to be ourselves, and we're going to be ourselves unapologetically. And I think it's extremely important, especially as we're talking about the gentrification of what ballroom is or LGBTQ+ culture is. Literally, kids today, you have no idea like what our elders freaking fought for. You know, hearing Marlo's story about like how much violence the girls had to like withstand, you know, and she was one of the lucky ones. I think it's super, super, super important that, you know, you just understand that you preserve this too, and that also, I really want to emphasize this because this is something that Ballroom even gets wrong about me. As a trans man, I have really had to, how do I say this, fight to be visible as a historian who is credible in doing this work. I say this because the community has its own trans misogyny when it comes to trans men, and even about youth. I'm 36. Some ball historians are like, you can only talk about ballroom from the time you started the community onwards. Excuse me? How are we going to study anything in history? World War II, the Civil War, you had to be there? It's fucking bullshit. And I know, you all should laugh. But literally, that is what some of these old girls give me as far as drama goes, because they see me and they think, who do you think you are, right? There's a lot of this tall poppy syndrome, this idea that only certain people can do certain things, you know? And I really got to say, if you ever get that kind of drama from your communities or elders, pay them dust. Seriously, pay them dust. No, because the tea is, who else is going to get these stories? Who else is going to share this knowledge, right? It has to be you. Sorry, one second. It has to be you. It has to start with you. You know, and I say that because I have been doing this for so long. I've gone through ups and downs. I've had people slam the door in my face or hang up the phone on me. But it's like, I know at the end of the day, these people are not going to be here forever. You know, I know at the end of the day, nobody else is going to do this. And also, I know that for me, it's important. Connecting with Marlo transformed my life. You know, she lived such an incredible, unapologetic life. And just to even know that somebody like that existed, was doing that in the 60s, it's fucking nuts, you know? So yeah, I hope I answered at least some of your questions.
Just to add on what you said, like I think something that like a lot of like the more established archives can maybe learn from is I'm like so grateful I got to work with Mama Bai, who does the leather archives. The way she runs her leather archives is almost just having subject matters for the archives be ran like for us, by us. Like have someone who's passionate about the programming help with the archives, because then it creates that like like when we would talk about like, you know, something that we like connect on is like the subject of realness, how some people are like, it can be problematic with that. We can have this conversation with each other and with other people in the community about like so many nuances that happen when it is like ran for us, by us, in that kind of sense. You know, because to bring it back to my example, one by, she runs this leather archive where you have all these like old archive like adult films, adult books, where it's like, you know what, if you're gonna have a moment because you feel these emotions from what this physical copy of this literature is gonna do it, go into some corner archive and have fun. Go dig yourself out. It's like to truly just experience this material middle, like they don't heavily police it, like.
Yeah,
and-
they
and-
allow you to actually enjoy it,
Right,
be part of the
right.
experience.
It's called
Yeah.
hard adjustment.
Yeah, and then, you know, I'll say this, that's also something, I mean, to that question, what's missing in the archive is the commentary. Like, I remember once, so there's this guy, Felix Milan, he hosts this, you could follow him, Old School Ballroom.
Oh, yeah.
So he's doing a documentary right now, and he was a student at NYU doing film in the 90s. He used to record balls with film, and he has some of those tapes today. He was showing an old ball from the 90s, I'm like blanking on the name, it was Shade Fest, 1992. And it was one of those things where it's like, you're watching this, but finally, one of the elders, Julian de la Blanca, who's a legend, he like, sit by me, I'm gonna tell you what's going on. So he was telling me about who was doing what. Oh, Scorpio was the guy everybody had a crush on, and you know, this, that, and the third. So that's one of the things is like, you know, the items are there, but to be activated, you do need to engage with the community to know what it is. I will also say at the Schomburg, I was very lucky because there was a black gay librarian who actually gave me like a cheat code. He was actually the person who archived a lot of the ballroom stuff, so he could tell me exactly what things are. I mean, that just is a point around DEI of like, we need our people also on the inside of these institutions, because then they give the things meaning. They know, you know, that's how you can find stuff. So, yeah.
Also knowing the nuances of the languages with the communities, because it's like, what we know about ballroom is going to be different from what someone else outside ballroom, or someone who is a working girl and in ballroom is going to know from versus someone who's just a working girl and who's just in ballroom. You know, it's just having those like, with it being for us, by us, and having those people who are passionate about that and can, again, hold on to those truths, the nuances that start those conversations around so much more and like help them still. You know, kind of, I forget, just to build off of like your, both of the questions you brought up, it's like, you have, you know, there is a lot of hope, because you do have, you know, like, for example, a big subject that came up is like GNC identities within ballroom spaces this year, and how to like just properly, how to like find more of those nuances in, and now there's like a GNC council, you know, that like, you know, as a way to help provide more info for like, you know, people who do want to be educated. So there is hope for the future. It is happening within communities. It's just being able to like giving the space and the language for that to like come up. So that way it's, again, community care and responsibility versus just ostracization. Because the cancellation should really only happen in extreme, like very specific cases. Because at times there is just genuine mistakes that happen. You know, we're all human. We're all going to make errors. You know, but you know.
Yeah, and to this point too, I think from this presentation and this whole conversation, I hope you all can see ballroom is a living, breathing culture. Yeah. It has literally gone through so many iterations, which is part of why whenever anyone is like, well, ballroom is like this, honey, everything was a scandal until it wasn't. Literally, a new category was born. I told you about butch bod face, right? In the 1970s, there were no butch queens walking. And the fact that we're having this conversation today, that there's so many, right, is like, tells you that things change. Internationally, there's way more transmasculine people walking ballroom, like all kinds of categories. I've always said trans men, transmasculine people, we are the future of the culture. That is on its way. It may not be happening en masse in the same way in the US, but you see it, it's totally, yeah, it's happening. We're coming through. I'm not gonna be the only one. I'll be grandma sick by that time. You know, but, you know, I really want to emphasize that like, you know, people can sometimes have a very static view on what culture is, just because, again, it's based on their positionality, right? This is what it is to me. But that doesn't mean that you can't change it, right? And like, that's, I think, the thing that has come through in this whole conversation is like, we need to be the change, whether it's documenting, whether it's holding community accountable, or creating new systems to understand, right, like identity, expression, all this stuff. It all ultimately starts with us. So I think, is that a good place to land?
Yeah.
Thank you. to support my ability to share this work. I mean, I gave you guys a little morsel, and also you guys are my guinea pigs because it's the first time I've shared any of the audio archives that I've amassed. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And yeah, don't be a stranger. Thank you so much. Oh yeah. Thank you guys. Oh yeah. Oh Jerry, I want to get a photo.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cool. All right. Guess we'll bring up the photos. Thank you. Thank you guys. Great. Yay. All right. Okay. Oh boy. I'll take a these. Cool. Okay, also can I get an epic one with all of you?
Yeah.
I never get photos from my talks, so I was like, I gotta do one. Okay. Yes, one of these. Okay. I like it.
There you go.
Ready?
Girl.
Go to the other side. Yay! Here, get in here. There you go. Ready? 1, 2. Oh, I'll get a bunch. Yay! All right, thank you guys so much.